I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Lancaster County Planning Commission of November 17th, 2021. A printed agenda is available outside the hearing room, and a copy of the full agenda, including the staff reports, is available at the front of the chambers with the clerk. The Open Meetings Act is posted just inside the doors at the back of the room. Please note the Planning Commission will be allowing testimony on agenda items by video conferencing for those individuals who have pre-registered. If you parked in the parking garage across the street to the north, the gate is open and no parking coupons are needed. Out of courtesy for those attending this meeting, commissioners, and the staff, cellular phone usage is not permitted in these chambers during any portion of the meeting. We appreciate your cooperation. The Planning Commission action today is final on the following agenda items. 1.1B, Preliminary Plat 20004. 1.5, Preliminary Plat 21005. 4.2B, Special Permit 21047. 4.3, Special Permit 17022A, and County Special Permit 21042. Any aggrieved person may appeal final action of the Planning Commission to the City Council or the County Board by filing a notice of appeal with the clerk within 14 days following the action of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission action on all other items is a recommendation to the City Council or County Board. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held October 27th, 2021.
So moved, Campbell.
Second?
Second, Rodenberg.
Jerry?
Okay. Ball?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Core?
Abstain.
Okay. Edens?
Yes.
Rodenberg?
Yes.
And Edgerton?
Yes.
Motion carried 5-0.
The next item of business is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda will be called at the same time and will not be scheduled for a separate public hearing unless there is a request from someone wishing to speak or at the request of a commission member. I will ask Jerry to read all of the consent agenda items into the record. Once these items are read, she will ask if there is anyone wishing to speak. If you wish to speak on an item on the consent agenda, we would ask that you stand and state that item. That item will then be removed from the consent agenda and scheduled as a separate public hearing under Section 3 of today's agenda. All items remaining on the consent agenda will be voted upon in total with a motion for approval. Jerry, will you please call the items on the consent agenda?
Thank you. Item 1.1A is change the zone 20029 from R3 Residential to H3 Highway Commercial District, and the associated preliminary plat 20004 for a new preliminary plat consisting of 2 lots. Both of these items are on property generally located at west of North 33rd Street and Schwar Drive. I would note that this is final action on the preliminary plat unless appealed to the City Council within 14 days. Item 1.2 is change the zone 21047 from AG Agricultural District to H4 General Commercial District and I1 Industrial District on property generally located at 201 West O Street. Item 1.3 is miscellaneous 21012 to review the proposed determination that the Northwest 48th Street redevelopment area be declared blighted and substandard as defined in the Nebraska Community Development Law. The study area is approximately 815 acres and is generally bounded by West Wilkins Street on the north, Northwest 57th Street on the west, West Holdridge Street on the south, and Northwest 48th Street on the east. Item 1.4 is miscellaneous 21013 to review the proposed determination and identifying areas of the city that meet the statutory definition of extremely blighted as defined in the Nebraska Community Development Law. The study area is approximately 815 acres and is generally bounded by West Wilkins Street on the north, Northwest 57th Street on the west, and West Holdridge Street on the south, and Northwest 48th Street on the east. Item 1.5 is preliminary plat 21005 for a preliminary plat consisting of one lot and one outlot on property legally or generally located at 3301 West O Street. This is final action on this preliminary plat unless appealed to the city council within 14 days. I would note that staff memo was provided to the planning commission dated November 15th relating to the removal of two conditions as agreed upon by the staff and the applicant. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on these items?
No.
Are there any ex parte communications that took place or additional information you learned while visiting the site?
No.
Is there anyone here wishing to speak on any of these consent agenda items? If so, please stand and state that item.
Is there anyone who wishes to speak on the consent agenda? Okay. If not, I will entertain a motion.
I would move that we approve the consent agenda. Campbell?
Second, Ball.
Okay. Jerry?
Ball?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Cruz?
Yes.
Edens?
Yes.
Rodenberg?
Yes.
And Edgerton.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
Okay, there are no requests for deferral, so we will now proceed to public hearing. Prior to staff making a brief presentation, each staff person should state their name, agency, and address. The applicant will then be requested to present his or her testimony, followed by those who wish to testify in support, followed by those who wish to testify in opposition. The staff will then be given an opportunity to respond to the testimony, and the applicant shall have an opportunity for rebuttal. Each person testifying should state their name and address and shall have 5 minutes to speak unless additional time is requested and granted. The timer will go off after 4 minutes. The clerk will then indicate you have 1 minute remaining to wrap up your testimony. Once the final minute has lapsed, the clerk will indicate that your time is up. If during your testimony you have copies of documents or materials you would like distributed to the Planning Commission members and/or included as part of the record, please provide them to the clerk. The Planning Commission will vote immediately at the close of the public hearing unless the commission votes to defer action or continue the public hearing. Jerry, please call the first public hearing item.
Item 4.1 is change of zone 19031A from AG Agricultural District to R3 Residential District, Plan Unit Development, O3 Office Park Plan Unit Development, and H4 General Commercial District Plan Unit Development, and from R3 to R3 Planned Unit Development, with exceptions to the zoning and subdivision ordinances on property generally located at South 40th Street and Yankee Hill Road. Staff recommendation is conditional approval. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on this item?
No.
Are there any ex parte communications that took place or additional information you learned while visiting this site?
No. Brian?
Good afternoon, Brian Will, Planning Department, 555 South 10th Street. So what I've thrown up here on the viewer is an aerial of the area that we're talking about today. And so Yankee Hill Road on the south, South 40th Street on the west, it's the area that most all of us know as the Yankee Hill Golf Course. Recall about a year ago, the first phase of this project had come through the process, and we're talking about this portion down here in the southeast corner. That was already rezoned R3 PUD about a year ago. That was approved to accommodate up to about 860 dwelling units, mixture of apartments, townhomes, et cetera. And so this is kind of the phase 2 to that, brings in the remainder of the golf course into the boundary of the PUD, and so that's what's outlined here in the dashed line, including the clubhouse, which is located here. Leaves out there's a residential property here at the corner, does not include that, and it comes down to the corner. Primarily what this is designed to accommodate at this point is a car dealership. And so as we look at the site plan, And as Jerry noted, we've got a whole bunch of different underlying zonings going on here. The R3, the H4, the O3. And what that's trying to do is really represent the primary underlying uses in the various areas. And so as we look at the site plan, again, this is what was approved last year, residential uses. It then brings in the majority of the golf course in this area here. And that's going to accommodate about 220 dwelling units. This area bounded here, which is shown as, I want to zoom in because they included a really good little graphic here. So this little graphic on the site plan really outlines the underlying zoning pattern that we're talking about. Again, this is last year. This is what's coming in now for residential. H4 through this portion here, and then a little bit of O3 to the north. And again, the H4, that underlying zoning is being proposed really to reflect the most intensive of those uses that's being proposed, and that is a car dealership. And you really need to get to more intensive zoning district to do that. So 220 dwelling units, 221 throughout the residential area, 148,000 square feet of commercial floor area, including car dealership, some pad sites, office use up here in the O3. The only kind of departure I'd note here from permitted uses in these areas would be this area right here to the north of Granger Parkway. As you read the report and saw the recommended conditions of approval, the staff is recommending that those uses be limited to the district regulations of the B2 zoning district, as opposed to the H4, which is more intensive commercial. The reason being, we're going to have residential uses in proximity. The B2, as is the O3, is a zoning district that's intended to be developed in proximity. It's a use permit district. It is intended to be developed in proximity to residential. So we thought it appropriate to limit those uses north of Granger, outside the commercial center proper, to B2. I note that we didn't put this on the consent agenda, and I think maybe a couple reasons. We were perhaps anticipating that some of the neighboring property owners, maybe to the north or to the east, may have some concerns or objections with as they did with the original submittal. I got to tell you, I've only talked to a couple people, or I've talked to only a couple of people, and after explaining what was being proposed, I didn't get any objections. So we haven't received any correspondence that I'm aware of up to this point from any neighbors objecting to it. The only other thing I would say is that with the improvements in the arterial streets, there are going to be some that are required in South 40th, and primarily it's going to relate to some turn lanes and relocating a signal. So there will be a zoning agreement that goes with this to the city council. That's not here for the planning commission to consider, but it will be for the city council. I think in principle we've agreed to the contents of that between the applicants and the city, and so I think we have that sewn up as well. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Brian, could you point out where the gas station is?
The gas station is, I think is this one proposed, just on the north side of Granger.
Okay,
there.
so that's the area that is zoned H4, but will be treated as
B2.
B2.
Correct.
And gas stations are allowed in
And
B2.
the service station would be allowed.
Okay,
But it will have screening, separation, buffer, as per the B2 district.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Questions for Brian?
Brian, I noticed in the applicant letter that they requested a waiver for block length, but I don't see any waivers, so is that resolved?
It's not necessary. We're adjacent to arterial streets here,
Okay.
so it's not necessary.
Any other questions? There was some mention of a traffic study. Was that related to 40th Street?
Actually, 40th and Yankee Hill. Yes, that's what a lot of the debate about the zoning agreement has been over. The traffic study that we're talking about was one that was submitted in conjunction actually with development to the south and concerned primarily with improvements in Yankee Hill Road. If I recall correctly, I wasn't involved with this at that time, but so that study was resubmitted. It's been the basis for the discussion now for the improvements in Yankee Hill and 40th, and whether they're appropriate or not, and whether they accommodate or not. We have sorted that out, I think, among staff, including LTU and the applicant. So that's what will result in terms of the annexation or the zoning agreement and what can be reimbursed using impact fees.
Understood. Okay. Other questions for Brian? Thank you.
Okay.
Testimony from the applicant?
Just takes time.
Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission, and Mark Hunziker, 600 Wells Fargo Center, I guess it's still called that, representing the three property owners who are part of this application. As Brian said, this is an expansion of the existing PUD that was approved for Chateau. And I wanted to just point out briefly, for the benefit of any of my neighbors who are here, to just make sure that it's understood that, let me get this on here. All this area shown with the shadowed streets in very light shade here, excuse me, is larger than the area that was originally approved for the Chateau community or PUD. On this area, we're going to have 860 dwelling units. On this area, we're talking about 221. So it's roughly a quarter the density of the apartment complex that was approved. There's one other thing I was going to say about the area over here north of Granger Parkway is owned by the gentleman who owns the acreage here, and is now going to be redeveloped. And part of the agreement of that sale is that this area near his home will be developed with the office uses to make for a smooth transition there. And so that I think that we're making a pretty good transition and a good mix of uses on this site. One of the things that was mentioned is the traffic study, and yes, there was a traffic study done that provided the basis for all of the improvements that are currently underway in Yankee Hill Road. They also called out a need for some additional improvements at the intersection of Yankee Hill and 40th Street particularly in the event there was additional development, and that's part of what is going to be part of the zoning agreement that Brian referred to. Now, as of today, we have an understanding as to how that agreement is going to look. If you want, I can talk to you a little bit about all the improvements that are going to be made in 40th and Yankee Hill. If you're not interested in that, I can just tell you that the main issue that was being resolved is how and to what extent impact fees would be used to reimburse the developer for making what are impact fee facility improvements in 40th Street and in Yankee Hill. And if you want a list of those, I've got a list that I can read to you if you want to hear them. But the long and short of it is the developer will be paying for those improvements, and over time, as impact fees are generated from the project, and the remaining project, not the apartment project, because those are already spoken for Yankee Hill Road. But the remaining area of this project will generate substantial amount of impact fees, which will be used to reimburse the developer over time as those are collected. And if there are any questions about any of that, I'll be happy to answer them. But otherwise, we've been working with the staff on this quite a while now, and I think we are at a point where everybody's in agreement that it should go forward.
Questions for Mark?
Okay.
I
Thank
think
you.
you're free and clear. Thanks. Thank you. Testimony in support of this application. Is there any neutral testimony? And testimony in opposition? All right. Any additional questions for staff at this time?
I do have one. Sorry, Brian. So I know that across 40th Street there, it's zoned R3, I'm sorry, O3.
03.
But I'm pretty sure those are all residences, townhomes, duplexes, those kinds of things. So even though this section along 40th Street in this side is zoned O3, they could put, like residences in there too if they wanted to. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Let me get this up, make sure I'm tracking your question here. Okay, so you're talking about this 03?
Yeah, and then the little part that is designated for O3 in this application, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, this 03 here was originally approved for, I don't know how many thousand square feet of office. That didn't go anywhere. They developed it for, the townhouses and that single family that are here. So your question was then about this 03? Mm-hmm. It could be developed, dwellings like that are permitted use in the 03.
And they wouldn't have to come back through us if they, if the
No,
market.
I think that's sort of changed that we could do administratively because it's a permitted use in the 03. The notes are going to be written such that they're not in a form right. That was one of the recommended conditions of approval. They're not really in a form right here where they're as usable as I think they could be. So we'll have it reorganized, and it will say something to the effect that for the 03 district and those permitted uses are allowed, and by administrative amendment, then they'd be able to come back and change it if they wanted to.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yep.
Any other questions for Brian? Yep.
So you mentioned that there's zoning being worked on as it relates to just the traffic changes. Can you shed any light on just the zoning change that's being either thought of or proposed?
Well, it's a zoning agreement, okay? And so it's like with the annexations. You're probably more familiar with seeing those annexation agreements. So it's an agreement between the city and the developer. I don't think there's really a difference between the two, the zoning or annexation agreement. But it has terms, and it's essentially a contract between the city and the developer that things that aren't appropriate to put in notes. It is a binding agreement between the city and the applicant. And so in this case, as Mark Hunsaker explained, the developer is going to pay for some improvements at the intersection that are reimbursable from impact fees. They're only reimbursable if they're in an agreement and it states that the city agrees they will be paid back. So that's the point of that agreement. They paid to make those improvements. They'll want to be paid back. So
Okay, thank
it
you.
has to be, yeah, it has to be an agreement. And it relates to, there's some turn lane improvements. There's a traffic signal that needs to be moved, and the arm on the traffic signal now, because of the additional lane, has to be a longer arm. It's those sorts of improvements in the arterial street that would be reimbursable.
Other questions? Okay. Applicant, do you have choose for any rebuttal at this time? Okay.
I move that we close the public hearing. Campbell?
Second, Core?
Jerry?
Ball,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Core,
Yes.
Cruz,
Yes.
Edens,
Yes.
Rodenberg.
Yes.
And Edgerton.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
I move that we approve zoning, change of zone, and trying to get it in the right spot.
19031A.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, there's a motion for a change, to approve change of zone 19031A. Is there a second?
Second, Core?
Discussion.
I'm very pleased with what they've come forward with as a layout. There is the protection of the office or other uses that fall under 03 as a transition to the acreage. It will obviously increase the traffic at that intersection, but I think it's being well addressed. And the use of homes in that area is much needed, lots, and it's a good infill for the city.
So it is going to change the complexion of that area, especially with the other projects that's happening around it. But it is good to hear about the traffic study that's being done in the zoning agreement. That was one of my biggest questions about the area as well. And it seems like it is going to be a great project for the community.
Yeah.
I know this is a big change for that area to go from a golf course to development, and I appreciate the developer, I assume, has done a good job because we don't have a lot of people here concerned, and so that means that they've done their outreach and done a good job, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think this is, they've made provisions for excellent transition from the different uses that are involved. It's a great mix of uses, good use of density. It's significant when you bring together different property owners and are developing what was a former golf course on the edge of the city, and I think this is a great project. Jerry?
Okay, this is for the conditional approval of changes on 19031A. Ball,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Core.
Yes?
Cruz,
Yes.
Edens,
Yes.
Rodenberg,
Yes.
and Edgerton.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Okay, I'll be calling the next three items together. They are associated. Item 4.2A is change the zone 21048 from R4 Residential District to R6 Residential District. The associated special permit 21047 to allow for a community unit plan with up to 36 dwelling units on approximately 0.89 acres with requested waivers. And the associated street and alley vacation 21007 to vacate the east-west alley between Y and Orchard Streets. All of these are on property generally located north of Y Street between North 23rd and North 24th Streets. I would note that the special permit 21047 is final action unless appealed to the City Council within 14 days. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on these items?
Yes. So I am a member of the Clinton Neighborhood Board. This was the person who brought this forward, presented at our board meeting back in October when it was originally a 12-plex. I also, when the zoning action came up about, the neighborhood organization sent emails basically stating this is what's going on, and then there was replies to that from the letter we have from Bob Reeves. on his position on that. I was also reached out to by Bob Reeves and basically told him, send a letter to the Planning Commission or come talk to him. I can't discuss it with you. And then his wife, Mary Reeves, reached out to me today. Again, same neighborhood, and I again told her, please reach out to come testify or write a letter to the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Are there any ex parte communications that took place or additional information you learned while visiting the site to be disclosed?
And then I also, the site is right, not too far away from me. It's on my route to work, so go by it quite often. The only thing I learned from the site is just to realize Y Street does not have parking on that particular section. It starts on the corner of that block, and then the parking towards University along Y Street. That was probably the only thing of note. Oh, and on the alley, that 3 houses back up to that alley for parking and garbage.
Thank you.
If I did all that right, first
Okay.
time.
You did.
Thank you.
Good job.
Noted.
Steve?
Steve Hendrickson with the Planning Department, 555 South 10th Street, filling in for George Wesselhoff. First, we definitely like to welcome Gloria to the Planning Commission. This is our first meeting, and right off the bat, something in your own backyard. So,
Thank you.
so this particular item, there are 3 applications. And just to give you a little context here on the screen, this is on the north side of Y Street between 23rd and 24th Street. So I've highlighted in red the area that is the area of the special permit for the community unit plan. The west half of this property has already been zoned R6. So one of your applications is the change of zone from R4 to R6 on the east side of that half of the block. And then the third application is the alley vacation that would be along the north part of the red line there, which that alley vacation was signed by the property owner in the south, the developer of the proposed 36-plex, but that street and alley vacation was also signed by the residents on the north side. And as Gloria noted, there are a few people who do actively use that alley. Our understanding is that they signed that petition with the idea that the developer was going to pave it and have a public access easement over it, and that is part of the CUP, is that that'll have public access, so the developer will not be able to block the back alley. Well, I'll probably a couple of times refer to it as an alley, the now former alley. If the alley vacation is approved, it would just be a private driveway, but it would have that public access easement over it so that all of them could get to the rear of their property. Part of what we would note here in terms of the change of zone, and this was noted when the first application came forward and was approved for the R6, is that Y Street really is kind of a transition here between the rest of the R4 neighborhood to the north, and as you note, as you go to Orchard and to Dudley, all the rest of the neighborhood is R4, predominantly single family, some 2 families also, of course, allowed in the R4. And then as you go further to just the south side of Y Street, the character significantly changes. On the south side of Y Street, just to the southwest, are apartments owned by the Lincoln Housing Authority. Directly to the south is the church that is the Seventh-day Adventists. And then also then further to the southeast is H3 commercial zoning that is primarily occupied by ABC Electric. Actually, along this corridor, there is the bike trail corridor for that. The bike trail corridor does not extend through the H3 zoning. It actually bends down further to the south. But that corridor used to be a rail line, and so we used to have a rail line. The P here is still the property that's owned by the city where the bike trail corridor is. And the rest of that used to be the rail line. It's still a short line, I think might be a term for it, that serves Lincoln Lumber there today. So partly what we had been viewing with this change of zone is that it is certainly setting the pattern for the north side of Y Street, that if this is approved, and similar to the one that had already been approved, that you're looking at potentially having an area of higher density on the north side of Y Street. That doesn't necessarily mean all the rest of the neighborhood would be appropriate to it, but that as you have the north side of Y Street with apartments, you might also have that then. You already have that on the south side, as well as you have some mix of commercial. So we viewed this as Y Street also serves as a collector in this neighborhood, so you get a bit more traffic on that route as well. You do have a bus route further to the west over at 21st and Y. There is one on 27th Street, and there is one that is further a couple of blocks down to the south on Vine. I would also note that this is the same developer of the project at 25th and Vine, which was a 36-plex of a very similar design that was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission several months ago. So this is a similar design. So moving in a little bit closer onto the property. So here's just an air photo. The three properties, three dwellings on the west side have already been removed. So this is primarily about the three dwellings that are owned by the applicant that is on the 24th Street side. It does show the church to the south and the apartments to the southwest. And the property to the southeast is zoned H3, but is currently vacant or has been in the process. I think ABC Electric was looking to expand onto that in the future. As a part of the application for the community unit plan, then, there is a specific site plan that shows the two 18-plex buildings, and then it shows that all of the parking would be at the rear, and then again it shows that private driveway that will now become with a public access easement. So in accordance with the comprehensive plan, that certainly encourages in many locations to have a mix of housing types within a neighborhood. It also encourages that you try to have the parking in the rear and the dwellings toward the front. And so this does a very nice job of that. One of the requests for a waiver is to reduce the front yard setback down to 7.5 feet, which at the face of it would seem to be a very short setback. But one of the reasons that we thought it was appropriate is that as you go down Y Street and even look around on this block, there are a lot of houses that have setbacks in the range of 5 to 10 feet to the house, and the porches themselves, in many cases, are 0 to 1 feet from the property line. So it's very much in the character of at least this part of the neighborhood where you have very much reduced setbacks. And actually in our zoning ordinance, there is a provision that says if more than 40% of the units on the block face have a less setback, you get to match that lesser setback. In this case, they're removing the units that have that lesser setback, so it is just easier through the CUP to note they're requesting the reduced setback. I would also note then the other part of the application waiver, the primary one, is the reduction in the parking from 1.5 stalls down to 1.3 stalls. And recently the Planning Commission and the City Council approved a reduction in our parking requirement down to the 1.5 stalls for multifamily housing. And what we had shown with that reduction in the parking requirement is that what we found in Lincoln, not just US-wide, but in Lincoln, people who are renting have far fewer cars than people who are in an owner-occupied circumstance. And actually it probably was even below 1.5 that we could have made the requirement to match what we're seeing, because there's a lot of households, even two-person households, that have one car, or maybe even given the circumstances, 0. But we thought 1.5 was appropriate, and then let people argue on kind of a case-by-case for our lesser requirement, which is the case here. They're asking for 1.3. And we think, given its proximity to the UNL campus, to downtown, to the bike trail, which is just a few blocks away, and also those bus routes that I pointed out, plus the fact that it was also going to have 6 affordable housing units of the 36, and there's a TIF financing that is a part of that to help. With that TIF financing comes the guarantee then that there are going to be a certain number of affordable units. We thought for all of those reasons it made sense then to have a small reduction in the parking for multifamily from 1.5 down to 1.3. The other reduction was a rather minor one, that so the stalls here are going to be a little bit more narrow, but the driveway behind them is going to be wider. So we thought that was made up for the difference in between the two. So with that, we have recommended approval of the change of zone, the special permit, and the street and alley vacation, and would be happy to answer any questions.
Dick?
Steve, to the west, what is the B3?
So to the west, you have really an interesting mix, and in the future, actually, we think we'd like to address this I-1 zoning. There is a cultural center actually over here on the corner, and then in the B3, I think there's just a few older commercial uses. Also, I would note that just a block to the south is property owned by UNL that was the former Whittier Junior High. And then right over here in the where I've marked UNL Cushman, that is actually the site where UNL recently announced they are entering into a private agreement to have a mix of housing and retirement housing, potentially recreation facilities on the site of the former UNL Cushman plant. And actually some of this I-1 zoning had been redeveloped into a nice mixed use on kind of office, actually kind of a small incubator business space. And so in the long term, we really think that this I-1, our comprehensive plan, actually discourages I-1 from abutting right up against residential. So we'd like to look at, is there somewhere in here where we might be able to have some rezonings, still reflect that there are a lot of commercial businesses in here, car repair and that type of thing, so we're not necessarily trying to have them go away, but not a lot of the uses anymore are using the I-1 zoning. And so just very much like this used to be I-1 and was rezoned to H3, we think long-term that would be done as well.
Thank you.
Questions?
I have some questions. How wide is that alley right now?
Well, typically alleys are platted as 16 feet wide, but the actual amount of gravel or surface in there sometimes can range between 12 to 16 feet itself.
Because I know there was some talk about how wide that alley was going to be. So what are we're making it, we're requiring it to be 19?
So yes, as it goes through the middle here, it will be 19 feet wide. At the throat entrance portions of it, it would be 16 feet wide.
So that would be a little bit bigger than it is now, wider.
Yes, and certainly it would be paved versus the present condition.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question here. Oh, there was some discussion on the number of units, and Gloria alluded to this as well, that at some point it was discussed that it might be a 12-plex, and now they're 18-plex.
Yeah, certainly as it went from being just a quarter of the block to a half of the block, the applicant was able to really make use of the fact of, okay, now I have these 2 access points, and was able to increase it so that this side, which might have been just a 12-plex, will now be an 18-plex, and this side can be an 18-plex as well. The R6 zoning, if granted on the whole half block, would have actually allowed up to 43 units. And so this case, it's a little bit less than what might have been allowed. The parking requirement is almost always what ultimately dictates how much you can get to fit on a site.
Sure. And there was some discussion about a waiver with regard to parking lot screening?
Oh, yes, so what has not yet been resolved, I believe, is that you have 2 existing houses that are just off the property line.
Okay.
And so there's really not enough room there for a 16-foot tree that, or your kind of things you might typically do. And we also want to try to make sure we work out, is a fence the best screening if that fence is going to be 2 feet off of somebody's house? So we think that's something that's probably better to try to work out. But what we're trying to do is offer some amount of screening, at least for the houses that are on the ends. In between, the houses are much further away, and you're dealing more with garages and driveways and that type of thing. So the screening would be, basically, there would be not screening in the middle, but there would be on the ends for the houses.
Okay. Other questions? Thank you. Testimony from the applicant.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. My name is Ann Post. I'm an attorney with Baylor Evans Law Firm. I'm here today on behalf of the applicant, which is LA Real Estate. Mr. Bird, on behalf of LA Real Estate, the owner of LA Real Estate, is also here with us today. And so I will try not to reiterate too many things that were already stated. But yes, the proposed project in front of us today, it proposes 2 apartment buildings of 18 units each. We are seeking tax increment financing with this project. As you're aware, tax increment financing, we don't have a redevelopment agreement confirming that yet. We have been in discussions, and we can tell you what we think that's going to look like at that point. And that's going to include 6 units of affordable housing, facade upgrades, some potential money for sewer relocation, and also for that sidewalk and alley paving. As was stated, if this project looks very familiar, that is both because the amendment to the redevelopment plan has already been in front of Planning Commission and approved. Also because this is very similar to a project at 25th and Vine Street that's also put together by LA Real Estate, and that is currently in the construction phase. I believe we're getting that started, hoping to get as much done before the ground freezes as possible. So I will say that one of the biggest differences with this project, biggest distinctions, is the extent that the developer has gone to try and accommodate as much parking as possible on this site. And so this was alluded to. I'll describe it in just a little bit more detail. And so we've had a lot of discussion about this alley paving. The question is, why are we paving the alley? To accommodate more parking? Is it just for paving? So the ultimate idea is that parking lot design standards don't allow you to use public right-of-way for kind of that backing up and turning motion. So if we want to be able to use that right-of-way for that backing up and turning motion, like we're showing on these parking stalls here, it needs to be purchased by the developer. And so that's where what the way we've structured that to work that out is that the developer purchases that alley, so it is that private property, now it's a private driveway, paves it, but also provides that public access easement so that those neighbors who use that alley for access on the north side can continue to use that. Not only that, but they went from a gravel, maybe some might argue poorly maintained gravel alley, that may not have had snow removal throughout the year to something that is going to be paved, it's going to be well maintained, and there's going to be snow removal because this apartment owner needs to use that for access. And so that's where when we worked with each and every property owner on the north side of the alley, on that, to that extent, they were willing to sign off. They have signed off on the alley vacation because they were approving of kind of that circumstances and getting that alley, paved alley while maintaining access. Also, you'll note that there's a little bit of change from the other site plan that was shown. That's because it was requested that the dumpsters be relocated. A previous site plan showed dumpsters over on these corners. Because some of these houses close to the alley here are so close to that, it was requested that that be relocated, and that's where those dumpsters were moved to the middle to get them further away from those homes. That also reduced the parking available slightly. So that's why we're at that 1.3 ratio instead of something more like a 1.5 ratio. I will say that, well, we certainly understand the interest in additional parking, that this parking ratio is by no means unprecedented.
One minute.
Is by no means unprecedented. I think there was a project recently approved by council at 22nd and P with a 1-to-1 parking ratio. Again, this is a 1.3 to 1 parking ratio. And also the recent studies that were alluded to by the planning department showing that only 58% of renter households have 1 car or less. Also that car ownership is declining among renters 15 to 34 years old. So while this is a reduction from current zoning code parking ratios, it is more reflective of what the experience is showing might be demanded by renter households. It's also in line with the 2050 comp plan that shows specifically policy, I think 11, that was passed from this commission onto city council that supports re-examining those parking ratios with an eye towards actually eliminating minimum parking ratios where possible. And so finally, I know it was alluded to that at one point this project was a 12-plex, and it was presented to the Clinton Neighborhood Organization as a 12-plex. Before that, half of the block was rezoned. I will say that the developer did reach out via email to Clinton Neighborhood Association regarding the increased scope of the project in February. I think it was to the neighborhood organization's email. It may have gotten lost in the shuffle, but since that time, we've heard from the association and are scheduled to speak at their meeting on December 6th to provide more information. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
So, Anne, there hasn't been a neighborhood meeting held as of yet.
The developer spoke with the organization when it was a 12-plex. We reached out to the organization in February to notify them. Reached out by email, notify them of the increase in scope, and never received a response. So there hasn't been another meeting to discuss this project at the same time. So we will be speaking on December 6th. And we did send out a letter to all the property owners within the vicinity, giving contact information, giving them some more details, and inviting them to reach out to us with any questions.
Can you tell me a little bit about what the makeup, like, are they just going to be 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, studios?
All the units will be 2-bedroom units.
Are any of them going to be ADA accessible?
I believe so. With tax increment financing, we need to meet ADA, we need to meet accessibility guidelines.
Okay. And in the staff report and in the letter between the two, there's been some difference between how many parking stalls there are. So is it 48 or is it 50 or?
It's 48.
Okay.
And that is where there was the original submittal with those dumpsters on the side. Moving those to the middle lost us a few parking stalls. And so that's where we went from the 50 to the 48, because we lost those parking stalls to relocate the dumpsters.
Thank you.
Other questions?
You asked my question.
Anyone else? Thanks, Ann.
Thank you.
Testimony and support. Is there any testimony and support? Is there any neutral testimony? And testimony in opposition? Okay, additional staff questions at this time? And I assume you don't want to come back up and, wow us again. So, okay.
Move that we close the public hearing.
Second core?
Jerry?
Okay, Ball?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Cruz?
Yes.
Edens?
Yes.
Rodenberg?
Yes.
Edgerton?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0.
I would move that we approve a change of zone 21048.
Is there a second?
Second?
Okay, discussion. We can discuss all three, and then we can take separate votes on the three
So,
related
I
items.
think they've put together a good proposal. We saw the exact similar thing on Vine Street and approved that. I think their work with the building architectural committee and such has helped improve the appearance quite a bit, even in simplifying it. And I think that having the alley widened and paved is a very positive thing for the neighborhood.
So, on this particular one, I think it's a good location for a smaller sized apartment complex. That's not my issue. The R6 is not at all. My concern is the lack of green space because of the lack of a setback. So we have all those houses in that area do sit really close to the street, but they have larger backyards, so they have green space. We've eliminated all green space by taking away that setback. And the parking is a concern because of location to university. There's no parking on the Y Street side. Those are actually relatively short blocks, so I'm concerned with reducing parking when this apartment complex has a good chance of getting filled with university students. Somewhat, I'm sure it's going to be mixed, but there's going to be a lot of cars. Kids move off campus, seem to have cars, so if you're looking at 2 bedrooms at each Each one has a car if they're a university student, you know? So those are my two concerns with it, not the R6 zoning. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with the overall size and those two special, the no green space is now allowed, and we've reduced the parking even more.
Other discussion?
I share some of Gloria's concerns, and along with one of the letters we received on this, I think it is important to understand that, yes, we need housing, and yes, we need affordable housing, but I've never been a real big proponent of tearing down houses to build, especially apartment complexes. So that gives me pause for one. And then also, as one of our letters said, just because they're living in low-income housing doesn't mean that they don't deserve, you know, green space for the kids to play, playgrounds, barbecuing, that kind of stuff. And I think that's important, especially if we're going to have families living here. With this being so close to the university, I don't know, is this really going to be for families, or is it going to be students coming in? So those are a lot of questions I have about this development. And part of it for me is we did just approve a development almost identical to this one on Vine. What's, you know, just a couple blocks away. What's the difference between that one and this one? And to me, it's much different when it's right on a major busy street. And plus, I'm trying to remember, I think we did have some houses torn down there as well. But I would much rather see a family in a house than in an apartment if they can afford it. And I was trying to look up on the GIS site what these, if these houses were dilapidated. They look fairly decent. I could be wrong from the pictures, but.
Tracy, the three that were already torn down were in very poor condition.
And I know that there's
I
three
can
more.
say that.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe that is the case, and then, then it's not such a big issue to me, but.
The other three, they're decent, but the three that he previously torn down for the initial 12-plex were in poor condition. But yeah, you reiterated my concern about green space, especially Y Street has become a very busy street with cement trucks that go down it regularly, and we're right up on it.
So I would be more inclined to support the special permit if it had more green space, or more amenities for families living there. So I'm on the fence about the special permit right now.
Other discussion? I think that my fellow commissioners have raised some really valid points. I think that there's a lot of important qualifications about this project itself and its location in terms of it being on the cusp of a neighborhood and yet very close to the university. And so it really is likely to have a mix of types of residents, which is exciting in terms of creating a neighborhood, because you have that opportunity to really mesh and meld a lot of different types of citizens together. I also I appreciate the concerns and the questions that we received and the conversation about green space. I think there are opportunities for green space very close by. Generally, given the location and given where it is, I do feel like this is a worthwhile project, and I will be supporting both the change of zone as well as the special permit. Jerry, let's call the vote, please.
Okay, this is for the approval of change of zone 21048. Ball?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Cruz?
Yes.
Edens?
Yes.
Rodenberg?
Yes.
And Edgerton?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0.
I would also move to approve special permit 21047.
Second, Rodenberg.
Jerry?
Okay, this is for conditional approval of special permit 21047. Again, this is final action on this item unless appealed to the city council within 14 days. Ball?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Core?
No.
Cruz?
Yes.
Edens?
No.
Rodenberg,
Yes.
Edgerton.
Yes.
Motion carried, 5-2.
And I would move to approve street and alley vacation 21007.
Second, Rodenberg.
Jerry?
Okay, this is for finding of conformity with the comp plan with conditions for street and alley vacation 21007. Ball?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Cruz?
Yes.
Edens?
Yes.
Rodenberg?
Yes.
Edgerton.
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Okay, the next item is item 4.3, special permit 17022A to amend the Dominion at Stevens Creek Community Unit Plan to allow for the removal of 77 single-family and townhome lots and the addition of up to 462 multifamily dwelling units for a total of 835 residential dwelling units generally located at North 105th Street and Wayboro Lane. Staff recommendation is for conditional approval. This is final action on this item unless appealed to the City Council within 14 days. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on this item?
No.
Are there any ex parte communications that took place or additional information you learned while visiting the site?
No. Steve?
Steve Hendrickson with the Planning Department, 555 South 10th Street. So this application, to kind of give you a little bit of background in terms of the bigger part of the setting too, but this is for a special permit for a community unit plan. It is to amend the previously approved Dominion at Stevens Creek. The main change is that in the area of the Dominion of Stevens Creek, which is currently approved for 77 single-family detached and attached dwelling units, there would be instead 462 apartment units. So going to the overhead gives a little bit of an idea of where we are. We're generally on the north side of O Street at 105th. Let this catch up, okay. All right, we're zoomed out. So the proposed apartments are shown in the pink as it shows up on the viewer. 105th Street, the 105th Street connection is shown in black. That connection is, I believe, pretty much done, but has not yet been open. Most of the Dominion at Stevens Creek started up on the north side of the development, closer to Holdridge, and has been working its way south. This is also in the area that is the Dominion at Stevens Creek butts up against Waterford Estates. So some of the letters you have been receiving for primarily from persons in the yellow area here on 104th Street, which is in the Waterford Estates part of the development, and also here on 105th Street or along Shorefront Drive in the Dominion. And for the purposes of your review, it doesn't really matter if they're in Waterford Estates or in Dominion, but just wanted to point out that there are actually two different developments here. The area in green is the area that is not yet platted, and so there is single-family units shown on the west side of 105th Street. To the north of the apartments would be single-family attached or townhome developments. There would also be some single-family attached to the east. There would also be an additional detention pond. There's an existing detention pond already along O Street. The area along O Street, the right-of-way is actually quite wider because the Nebraska Department of Transportation has already purchased a rather large corridor that in the original plan may have been for office, because we also have a natural gas pipeline that's in that area. But instead of having offices there, it was purchased by the state and instead will be used for right-of-way in case O Street at some point is widened to 6 lanes. But that intersection at 105th and O should be open. And so just when, unfortunately, when our letter went out and we notified the Dominion and the CUP, our application did not include a map that was this clear. So it was very unclear to a lot of property owners exactly where the apartments were located. So there were a few initial letters that said, well, I'm concerned about apartments next to me or adjacent to my property, and that is not the case. All of the lots in green have yet to be final platted, and actually there's some lots up here that have not been final platted. But the general point is that the developer was actually trying to give notice to people in terms of the change in the plan, both to the greater neighborhood, but also get this done prior to actually platting any lots that would be immediately adjacent to this property. So in this particular area, we'll go to a drawing that shows kind of the bigger context here. So this is going even further out. So we have O Street here, we have 98th Street to the west, 112th would be off to the east. The area of the circle is approximately where the apartments would be located. So you can see kind of generally the area of the single-family lots that have been built on or approved. There's some single-family attached to the west. Mostly had this exhibit to show a couple of things. One is that the Lincoln Public School elementary site is located up closer to Holdridge Street and is right off 104th. So if persons were in the apartment and dropping kids off at school, potentially they would go up 105th Street, which isn't shown on this exhibit, up 105th. There'd be a couple of different turns you would have to make to go up to the school at 104th. Certainly the traffic from 462 apartments in the greater sense is going to be more than the traffic from 77 units. Though, however, single-family detached units have generally about 9.5, 10 trips a day versus multifamily, which is in the range of about 6.5 trips today. Also, in terms of school-age children, the number of school-age children per dwelling unit is significantly lower for apartments than it is for single-family detached. So 460 apartments may not generate actually as many school-age kids as even 77 units. But certainly in any neighborhood, there's meant to be a certain amount of traffic that goes back and forth within a neighborhood, and having a school generally will mean that some people would head north to that area, which is anticipated anyhow. Given the proximity to O Street, though, being just one block off of O Street, the majority of the trips, if you're going over to 84th Street or going to Walmart on North 84th Street or 98th, the fastest way to take would be to go down to O Street and head to the west. But partly to the exhibit, not only to that, but also to note the large area in red. The area in red has been a part of the comprehensive plan for 20 plus years and is a future commercial center. The commercial center on O Street was viewed as something that was really kind of a longer term. You needed to get enough people living out in this area before the commercial could be viable. But certainly that commercial could include a mix of apartments as a part of that commercial area. Or we have seen in a lot of areas around town, it's approved for commercial, but ultimately gets developed with townhomes or apartments because there's not quite the market for commercial. And so that area has not yet been zoned for it, but just to give you a little context of in this greater neighborhood, there certainly could be in the future multifamily with that. The specific site plan for this site then, zooming in on the application. So for the moment, it is just shown as 462 units. Like we have had in some other projects, there isn't a specific layout at this time. A more specific grading plan would have to come back in once that area is ready with a specific site plan, if the CUP change is approved. And that would definitely, watershed management would be reviewing that and reviewing the additional detention to the detention that is there today. So that watershed plan has not yet been completely finalized, but we think with every confidence that it can be handled. Would also just note in terms of some of the comments, our comprehensive plan encourages a mix of housing types within every neighborhood. Just in this general area over at 88th and Holdridge, the Planning Commission and the City Council approved a large apartment complex that had 596 units. That was in an area that was previously undeveloped and had acreages, large lot development to the east and to the south. Even on your agenda today, you had the Chateau Apartments at 40th and Yankee Hill, which was 860 units in an area that had acreages to the east. The existing single family was much further to the north. 84th and Rokeby CUP was on your agenda within the last 6 months. That approved a new apartment project as part of a mix of housing types within the neighborhood. You also had a PUD at 70th and Rokeby Road that approved apartments. Just further to the west of this, at 90th and O Street, is the Shadow Creek neighborhood that has apartments approved along with single family and a small commercial area. And generally throughout most of our neighborhoods in Lincoln, you have a mix of housing types, so you have apartments and that you also have a single family attached and single family attached as well. This application for the special permit did not include any waivers. We do have some minor conditions of approval, and would be happy to answer any questions that you may have about the CUP.
Questions?
Steve, back on your colored drawing, isn't the green over there, is that where the new fire station's going?
Correct. The fire station is located approximately right about here, and that has already
Okay.
been constructed.
Can you go back one more that shows that,
This one?
yes, so that will have a buffer between the existing homes, and is that a guarantee? It's platted, and the developer couldn't take over those lots and make his proposed apartments butt up against some of those other previously owned homes?
Well, there is no guarantee, I guess, in this, but that would have to come back through the process. So if this street of single-family attached were going to be changed to also be a part of the apartment project, then it would have to come back through the process. The single-family lots on the west side, I'd have the applicant talk about. There's actually a watershed reason why they're probably sticking with the single-family detached lots on that side. But again, that could potentially be switched to single-family attached at some point in the future, because all of our zoning districts allow single-family attached or detached within the same zoning district. But if this was going to be switched to apartments on the west side, then yes, that would have to come back through the process. It'd be rather difficult to do because definitely 105th Street is needed in this area. If you didn't have 105th Street going through, then all of the traffic would have to go through 104th. And so that's part of the plan, is distribute the traffic between 104th and 105th, and eventually also 108th off to the east, and it is Wayboro Lane on the south side. And those are future streets that would have yet to be built.
Thank you.
So I guess it's add-on question. So between the future street on the south, so from O Street, yes, and O Street, so that's part of the existing CUP, but it's still going to be platted residential?
Yes, this is shown for single-family attached lots. Again, this could be townhomes. That part is right up against the pipeline planning area, and that's an area where generally we're concerned about having residential within that area. That area was actually approved prior to the pipeline being moved slightly to the north. And so this area here will pretty much remain single-family attached. It wouldn't have a higher density because it is its proximity to the pipeline planning area. But that area was already approved for single-family attached, and that is not being changed with this application. We do want to keep Wayboro Lane providing that east-west circulation so that the people in this future neighborhood, and I should point out, this area here is not part of the Dominion today. That is just an area that is shown to give an example of what could be done over there, which is a requirement of our preliminary plat process that you always show, well, how could the adjacent land potentially develop? You'd have 112th Street right over here, and there would not be any further access points to O Street. So this connection of Wayboro Lane over to the intersection of 105th is fairly important. And definitely in the long term, as this neighborhood built out, Lincoln Transportation Utilities will be looking at 105th Street to see if it meets the warrants for a signal at some point.
Is the developer for Dominion the same as the developer for Waterford?
No, they are two different developers.
Steve, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. So the area shaded in green, nothing's been built in, like there's no homes or anything there right now?
Correct. And when I say buffer, it doesn't intend a green buffer or anything like
Right,
that.
right,
It's meant that these would be single-family detached and attached. The green is just trying to show that they're not platted. There's nothing there yet. The platted lots are all around in this area, so a lot of these are fairly new homes that have been built in the last couple of years. Waterford Estates as a whole started much further to the west, and so there's areas to the west that are 10 to 20 years old.
You referred to when you were mentioning other areas with developments, with apartment developments, and you compared it to Chateau, which was in front of us a little earlier today. In that instance, we had a traffic study that was involved. Has there been any traffic study in this area?
So typically, the traffic studies are a requirement of commercial development and not of residential development.
Okay.
This is not an unusual amount of units. Even with the additional 426 units, this is not an unusual density. This is R3 residential. As I guess I should have noted, even with the increase in units, it's still a good 230 units below what could have been approved with the R3 zoning. And the R3 zoning is generally around 7 dwelling units an acre. So your typical 27-foot wide street is meant to handle this type of development, the total number of units. And as part of what I was pointing out in these other areas also have 27-foot wide streets. So there is nothing unique here in terms of the total number of dwelling units that our local streets can't handle in any other area.
How often do CUPs like this change? Like once it was set up that it was going to be 77 units in this area, which is what folks saw as they were looking at purchasing in this area. And you know, it is within the R3 numbers that this is, makes sense. But in terms of after that initial plan's put together, tell me a little bit about how that works.
Quite often. So I've worked for the department for 32 years and have seen a lot of areas where development comes in after the fact, where it was shown for single family and then is proposed for multifamily after the fact. And in many of those cases, it's actually immediately adjacent to single family uses. The project you just had in front of you at 24th and 23rd and Y, I mean, that was multifamily immediately adjacent to the north were single family uses. And so either in redevelopment areas, you see it quite a bit, but even in newer areas, the areas around 70th and Holmes Lake Road, there was quite a few apartments that were added there in the CUP after the original approval. So it is not uncommon. Certainly with any developer, they try to have the apartments approved in advance so that the people moving into the area know the big picture. But it is not uncommon to have somebody say, well, the market has changed. I'm seeing more of a market for this use or that type of use. Particularly, we've had an awful lot of offices or office zoning switch over to multifamily use because there just wasn't the market for office or even their commercial area change.
And there was some discussion in the staff report about Outlot B and the detention and the conversation with involving NRD and that. I think what you said earlier is that the grading and that part of it will evolve as the actual plan is put together.
Yes, and actually I'll go ahead and call up Tim Zock with Watershed Management because we dragged him down here today because we thought there might be some questions about drainage.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tim Zock with LTU Watershed Management Division.
Yeah, can you just shed a little light on the conversation that was in the staff report about the detention in Outlot B and what that will look like or how that can pivot from the 77 lots that were originally in the plan to the apartment complex that we see today?
Yeah, so with this, as a condition, they'll have to revise their grading and drainage plan and their drainage analysis to show that they can meet that additional runoff. So they'll have to probably expand their detention in size and volume to make sure that they're not increasing the runoff at this location.
Okay, and so then those plans go through Watershed for approval before anything else can occur?
Yeah, so they'll have to submit revisions after, if it's approved by Planning Commission to meet those conditions before they can get final approved plans and then go on to plating and building permits.
Any other questions? Yeah, Dick?
Steve, this is a technical question, and just for education for me, as anything else. It was a CUP because it was outside the city originally. It's now inside the city, right?
No, actually, we don't allow, as part of our comprehensive plan, urban residential uses outside the city limits. So they came in and got approval of the change of zone and the community unit plan and the annexation all at the same time. I think in this case, they actually phased the annexation in a couple of phases, but it has been in a CUP since day one.
Why not a PUD?
In this case, the office they were intending to do through a separate use permit. Because they also knew that it was quite possible the state might buy other offices and then they would have no commercial whatsoever. And our PUDs typically, we want to have a commercial in the PUD. As a result of this one, there may not be any commercial except that this one little lot here may have a small office building on it. But otherwise, there's no commercial then in this, in the Dominion. The commercial would then probably be over toward 98th and O Street.
Got it. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Watershed?
No.
Okay, I think you're released. Thank you. Go ahead, Tracy.
Steve, there weren't any, at the time that this project was first before us, I assume years ago, I can't remember, but there wasn't any apartments proposed at that time. Am I thinking
Correct.
correctly?
As it originally went through, it did not include any apartments.
There was some discussion in the staff report about the phases of the development, like phase 1 through 3A, and now this is phase 4. Are phases 1 through 3 completely platted then?
Generally, the phasing plan that was a part of this all related to the northern end of the development.
Okay.
Because we have the Sky Ranch Acres acreage development, and there are 2 street connections into Sky Ranch Acres. And as a part of getting that original approval to connect the public streets together, it was agreed that some of these phases would be done with those streets not connected, a barricade put in place. So the phasing was really more about, okay, we're going to get a lot of this development done, the truck traffic and things done, construction traffic, and then we'll open up the streets there through Sky Ranch, and I think it was somewhere in the range of 75 dwelling units or so on the phasing. So whether this was phase 4, phase 5, or phase 3 was not quite as important, though we definitely wanted to make sure we had this connection done at 105th Street. And I'm sure the applicant would tell you, the hope was that would have been done quite a long time ago, but anytime you build a road through government, sometimes it takes a little longer. And Bob Simmering's not here, otherwise he'd get me for that one. So.
And tell me where the connections are to Waterford. Can you point
So
those
the
out to me?
connection to Waterford, you'd have this Wayboro Lane, boathouse, and a shorefront. And then there would also be a connection up here on what bends and becomes 104th Street.
Okay.
The lake itself, you're just seeing part of the edge of it here, and at one of the cul-de-sac bays here. The lake itself is way off to the west. But we were just trying to give you a proximity of that. Yes, a lot of these lots are close to the lake. There is actually a public trail planned that'll be along the east side of the lake and then go along Shorefront Drive. And that is hopefully planned for the nearer term.
Other questions for Steve? Thank you.
And I will leave this map up here for reference for people who are testifying if they want to try to point out where they are on the map.
Excellent, thank you. Testimony from the applicant.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mike Eckert with Civil Design Group here in Lincoln, 8535 Executive Woods Drive, Suite 200. We've been the design engineer for the Dominion property from its inception, I think, which was back to maybe 2017. And so I appreciate Steve's clarification of a lot of questions and issues, and I think some of it has come up more or less from the notification area that they sent out was much wider than the one they would typically do, or the one that was implied to me that would be done. And so 250 feet from the area of the change on the CUP is typically that area. And so we sent out letters about a month ago there were, I believe, 10 lots that were in the 250-foot notification area, 6 or 7 of which are now owner-occupied. And so, yeah, with that, I want to get this exhibit back up there and reiterate the answers to some of the questions that you've had in the respect that these single-family home lots on this side are unplatted today. In fact, the Waterford lots here are platted, and there are some Dominion lots platted right here. And so what we've done in consultation with planning, as well as the fact that the original hydrology for those lots, these lots right here, falls to the west, and so the conversion of those to anything more than single family would cause an increase in density that would cause us to have to put a detention cell along here somewhere. And so those are staying, those are being platted as single family. That plat will likely come before the planning department at some point early next year for the townhomes and the single-family lots here. At this time, the apartment area, these townhomes, and these townhomes would just be platted as an outlot as we continue to work towards the design, the grading and detention work that Tim spoke of. And so, but just to be clear, those lots will be platted as single-family lots. There is no anticipated change in those. And that was part of our goal, to preserve that planned buffer between Waterford and this apartment complex. And I've got another exhibit that I'm going to put up that shows a layout that we've done that has primarily been just for density purposes, and to show you what we're planning on here too. Again, what's before you is just the change to increase the density in this area. It's not a change of zone. We will come back and have to do the grading and drainage plan, but there's really, per se, no real site plan approval. But at this point, the other thing that we have anticipated is, and what we've done in a lot of our multifamily projects, is to buffer the perimeter of the apartment complex with standalone garage buildings, and then have parking area that surrounds it. So it's kind of hard to read, but from this building to the edge of 105th Street would be 238 feet. And then these lots are 120 feet deep that'll be platted. And so that provides pretty close to 360 feet, which is the length of a football field with both end zones combined. If you looked from goalpost to goalpost, that would be the distance from the perimeter of the Waterford Community Unit Plan to a typical building in that location. And so, and I've got lots of other examples we can talk about if needed of recent projects that have been done with multifamily, having single family much closer than that. And so, with that, then want to reiterate kind of what Steve was talking about too, with the developer in combination with the city have gotten the turn lanes installed in O Street. That was about a $600,000 expense when all was said and done. This connection that is also going to provide an outlet for the entire eastern edge of the Waterford development to have quicker access to O Street is nearly complete. It's simply down to putting in sidewalks and street signs, and there's a high likelihood that will open by Thanksgiving, so a week from tomorrow. So that's in. And in terms of trip generation, as Steve said, it's usually not required any kind of a traffic study when we're we were originally, the Dominion CUP was 160 acres at 6.9 units per acre. That would allow 1,100 units. And with this change, we're at 835. As Steve mentioned, there's still 224 unused units of density within this. But we've chose this for the limit of what the developer feels is necessary for the market change. It does get us back in line with the goal of more than 4 units, residential units per acre in the comprehensive plan. We were only at 2.6, and this would take us over 4. And so I think in the larger community sense with housing needs, as Steve talked about, this is something that is in line with the comprehensive plan. And so with that, the beeper's going off. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions for Mike? Lorenzo?
So, understand the site plan is not complete. So you said you use this for density purposes. What's the assumed number here in terms of this visual?
For the apartment complex? Yeah, 467 units.
Okay, for this, okay, got it.
That's what's on the application.
Right. I thought that what's on the application for what you're showing here was different. That's why I asked. Okay.
So that is specifically for this area, and then when you combine it with all of Dominion, that takes us up to 835 total units in the CUP area.
Dick?
Mike, I can understand you only sending out to the 10 residences that were around. But with this being a major change in the development, should not a presentation have been made to Waterford and also to Dominion people?
Well, we generally adhere with the guidelines that the planning department gives us, as you may know. And given that there is a lower level of activity in this apartment project is primarily going to use O Street for its entrance in and out, we sent it out to the notification area that at the time they informed us it would be.
Other questions for Mike? I think you're clear.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, is there any testimony in support of this application? Testimony in support? Is there any neutral testimony? And testimony in opposition?
How do you want us to do this? Do you want us to queue? What is your preference?
Just come up one at a time and we'll have you like duke it out at the microphones to see who gets to go first.
So we're not
Yeah,
gonna be
no,
doing
I'm
any
kidding.
duking, okay.
Yeah, please come forward. Thank you.
All right. My name is Catherine Dornboss. I'm a resident at 701 North 105th Street. I'm happy to point out to you where I live. I can do that now if you
Yeah,
like me to.
that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Perfect. So if I can get that overhead.
Yeah, come
This
up in a
takes a
minute.
second.
Great. So I live in this house right here. Is everyone able to see? I think they are. Perfect.
Thank you.
And then I just want to confirm that everyone got my oppositional email, which had a lot of detail in it that I'm probably not going to talk about today, but I wanted to specifically record in black and white before this meeting.
Yes.
So I'm seeing affirmation, so I will not bore you with a lot of those details, and I appreciate you all for reading that beforehand. Thank you for your time in preparation for this. I think my biggest concern about this project is that my first notification that it was going to happen was your letter to me, which I received last Tuesday. And when I called McCombs Realty, who is the facilitator for the Dominion at Stevens Creek HOA, it was news to them that this was the plan. Further, when I looked at the beginning of this special permit application, the application was put forward on September 29th to your body. And there was a virtual HOA meeting on the evening of September 28th that would have been an incredible opportunity to talk to neighbors in this direct area about this plan. And I have concerns about that timing, and I think you all can understand why. I understand that there may be guidance for only 250 feet off of a project for notification, but a large apartment like this will affect a large portion of the neighborhood beyond 250 feet. And particularly my home sits on North 105th. And I do hope that there are more families in the neighborhood. And I hope people do traverse through the neighborhood to get to that new elementary school. I'm excited about that project. I hope to one day utilize it for myself. I don't have children. And one of the reasons that I moved into the neighborhood was the hope that there would be a great fabulous new elementary school nearby that maybe I could even walk my kids to, right? And so for me, I see this as a potential traffic issue for people traversing from a large multi-dwelling unit directly past my home to the elementary school every morning. I also just see a six-fold upfold in traffic. And that is not necessarily what I anticipated when I chose to move to the neighborhood in 2021. As you all probably saw in my email, I sat on the Birmingham City Planning Commission, Birmingham, Alabama, for 5 years. I have a distinct appreciation for the difficulty and the time that your role entails. And I've also heard from a lot of citizens, both positive, neutral, and negative feedback about proposed projects in Birmingham, Alabama. This is my first interaction with you all, but I just appreciate that your position and the tough position that you're in. But it also gives me a little bit of knowledge when looking at these plat maps and getting a notification like this. And I will say that a lot of my neighborhood did not know that they had an opportunity to have an opinion about this. So they received the notification and they assumed that this was a foregone conclusion, that this would happen. And very honestly, maybe to the frustration of one or two people in this room, I went door to door to notify people that this was happening and make sure that they knew that they could have an opinion. And as I think you can appreciate from the many emails that you got and the many people that you're going to hear from, there is an overwhelming sense of opposition for this proposal. I elucidated very clearly some reasons. I have major concerns about traffic. I have major concerns about parking. One of my concerns about parking is that we have heard today that in more dense neighborhoods, there might be less of a need for parking. I worry in this neighborhood because there are no public transit outlets proposed for here, that you will actually need as much parking for a apartment building as you would need for a single family residence, and I assume 2 adults in every house. Further, I just want to say that just because you can put more density in a particular area doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, or that you should, or that it's a great idea from a city planning purpose, right? And I just want to call that into the record. And then my final concern is sort of an environmental one and around sort of this stormwater drainage issue. I see a lot of stormwater management, not problems, but just a lot of stormwater present along O during big rain events. And I actually live right next to sort of a drainage easement lot. And I admire a view of the lake. I'm not on the lake, but I'm a little bit removed from it. And I just hope that should any project go forward in this place, that those stormwater management considerations are made in good faith to keep the environment there pristine. So I appreciate your time. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you for listening to us.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Next, others in opposition. Yeah, come forward, please.
Hope I could talk. My name is Orson R. Robinson, Jr. And when I first heard about this from Catherine, we'd heard a little bit about it before, but we didn't hear that much until Catherine came by and talked.
Could you give us your address for the record, please?
I'm sorry?
Could you give us your address?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
520 North 105 Street, and I would like to point out on the
Yes,
map
please.
where that is. And it's right here and was colored in yellow by someone. So,
Got it. Thank you.
okay, so we're even closer to the action. I prepared something I would like to read into the record, and I have also sent it by email. So I'll try to go a little faster. It's short. The commission is going to hear many objections, I believe, over the proposed zoning change for the Dominion at Stevens Creek subdivision. Both my wife, Sue, and I, and every other neighbor I have spoken to strongly support these objections for reasons primarily focusing on traffic and the safety of children in our neighborhood. Rather than simply reiterating these, I would like to register an objection involving an equally important issue, our rights as citizens. I'll just show the. Okay, this is an article, maybe it should zoom a little bit. It's an article from the Journal Star dated November 15th, 1917, and entitled, "Two Major Developments Would Grow Lincoln East of 84th Street." The first development Dominion at Stevens Creek would have 433 homes and townhomes on 154 acres of land, blah, blah, blah. The key point about this, as already had been mentioned, there was absolutely no mention of an apartment complex or any ancillary business proposed for the subdivision. The second subdivision was Wandering Creek, which would add, quote, hundreds of homes and apartments along with commercial development near 84th and Van Dorn, north of the Firethorn neighborhood. The point we'd like to make is that the history of these two subdivisions provides an excellent example of the right and the wrong way to pursue subdivision approvals and to eventually market properties to the public. The Wandering Creek developer was completely transparent in the original submission, and the firm executed the plan as written. Aware that apartments and ancillary business were going to be in the neighborhood, buyers of the lots were free to either pursue or pass on the opportunity to purchase one. In stark contrast, the Dominion developer appears to have either not known what his final intention was or else changed courses when a better business opportunity and or capital was secured for the more aggressive apartment complex plan. We are here today to encourage the Commission to be extremely conservative in approving these significant changes and to always consider and appropriately prioritize the rights of citizens to purchase and live in neighborhood types of their choice. Why is this important to our family? A few years after retiring from Pfizer, my wife and I decided we need to downsize and build a new home. In searching for a suitable location, we found Dominion at Stevens Creek well before the first lot was sold. I found it on the internet by Googling and stumbled on it, so that's how I found it. Our daughter's family lives in beautiful Waterford estates, and we quickly fell in love with the idea of building right next door to her and our grandkids in a very similar type of neighborhood. We did our homework, worked with the realtor, and confirmed that the zoning and covenants for the new subdivision would ensure that we would be building in a subdivision of mostly single-family dwellings interspersed with some townhomes, no apartments, and minimal commercial business. After verifying that zoning and restrictive covenants were in place to protect us, we put $1,000 down on the very first lot sold in the subdivision on April 19, 2019. We had to wait to make the down payment for Nebraska Realty to come up with the paperwork to start. I don't know whether it's platting, I don't know what your terminology is, but we had to wait several months. And finally we got our $1,000 down, thought we were doing great. We then had our new home built and moved in to the place I indicated on March 24th, 2020. We did this all with an absolute solid belief that the Planning Commission's earlier actions would protect our investment and would ensure that we would be building in the type of neighborhood we wanted. And what has now happened? A group of developers present you with a proposal that sacrifices our personal happiness and right to live in the type of subdivision we want for their own business reasons. Make no mistake, money is involved here, and it is undoubtedly behind the change in plans from what they originally presented and through their representatives to us. My wife and I strongly encourage the Commission to reject the developer's proposal to amend the original zoning plan and to replace single-family homes and townhomes with apartment buildings and whatever else might be forthcoming. The time for these to have been considered was before the 2017 submission of the original plan. Changing the plan now to allow apartments to be built in our neighborhood tramples on our right to buy and live in the subdivision type originally presented to us by the developer. We sincerely encourage you to respect and protect our right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you.
Okay.
Other testimony in opposition?
My name is Justin Dean. I'm at 701 North 105th, and I'm just going to read this off because I'm a little nervous.
Will you take a moment and, is your home on this map right
It
here?
is.
Could you show us which one, please?
I believe it's this one here.
Okay, thank you.
I assume that each of you have received my letter or my email of opposition.
Yes.
If you haven't, I hope that you do read it. I'm really here to address 3 items: the proposed timing of the changes, renters versus owners, and a call to action. As everybody has said here, the proposed timing seems deceptive. We didn't receive notice until, I don't remember what date it was, but we didn't hear it in our HOA meeting on the 28th of September. And then the proposed changes were made on the September 29th. So that seems like that was a plan to not tell us about it. And as he said, maybe he didn't have to tell us about it. It just seems like Mr. Campbell said, it would have been nice to include the neighborhoods around it, the proposed change. As Catherine noted, she's my partner. When we bought in May of 2021, we were looking for a quiet neighborhood with low traffic and somewhere where we could raise a family. Had we known there was a multi-unit or multi-family unit proposal, we probably would have not bought in that neighborhood. My next point is renters versus owners. I'm a landlord myself. I have multiple properties in Alabama and in Nebraska. And as some of you probably already know, there's horror stories of how tenants versus owners handle their property, their neighbors, and the community around them. And I've seen the worst of the worst, and I've also seen the best of the best. So I'm not saying that all are bad. I just don't want the bad to be near my home. So for you commissioners, I please ask that you consider wholeheartedly if you would want this change in your neighborhood. If you would want added neighbors that aren't invested in their home, that are only renting, to be in your backyard. Thank you.
Thank you. Other testimony in opposition?
Still up here. Hi.
Hi.
My name is Bert Leach. I live in Waterford Estates, 366 North 104th Street, and which would be right here.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, right here, because it's right on where the street's going in to the division. We moved the house, we bought the house in February and didn't get moved in until April 1st when it was completed. All these are done. There's, 10 more that are being constructed right here. For this to be open by Thanksgiving, that street, there's still a lot to be done with construction and everything, so that would be a miracle. I'm just gonna, that was great. The reason why we come, I'm originally a rancher. I am in construction. My wife works at the ER in both Bryan Memorial Hospitals, and we moved to Lincoln from out west. For sure, I have a real big garage, 50-foot long garage, and so that was my main thing, because I have materials, but we wanted a quiet neighborhood. We'd looked at Waterford a year ago when we knew that we'd probably move to Lincoln. We thought, this is too perfect of an area, there's no way, and then here we are. So, but we're talking, and we were told, and we really did more than just the realtor and Waterford Estates, that we knew this would be houses built on it, but no big complex. That'll change no matter what. This being the access, I'm on this corner lot. That'll be so much more traffic, and don't have all the fancy words like the guys do, generally speaking, and all that, but everybody knows the difference between how many cars. I've been around apartment complexes that have more than 1.3 cars. They have 4 or 5. Anyway, it's just, I would never have bought there. That was well said. This is a real good reputation out there for everything, and I'm not saying that. Anyway, didn't expect this many more. That'd be so much more, and I will sell, and I'm not, I appreciate you hearing us today, but absolutely I will sell, because it'll change my whole way of life on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Other testimony in opposition?
My name is Susan Powers, and we live at 418 North 104th. Let's see, and we are right here, actually. And I just want to point out the fact that O Street currently is, during rush hour, is backed up to 98th Street. And you add 600 and 700 more cars to that, it's going to be a huge traffic jam. And let's see, and everything that everyone said I agree with. And I just think I hope that integrity overrides the almighty dollar. And they'll honor the expectations of the already existing neighborhood people.
Thank you very much. Other testimony in opposition?
My name is Michelle Smith, and I live at 427 North 104th Street, which is, I believe, right here, right by the one. Okay. My husband and I purchased our home in September of 2021, and I did write a letter in opposition. I hope each one of you have had a chance to read it. I want to thank you for your time today. I'm glad that I was able to listen to 2 different pieces of business before you that did not directly pertain to me, because I can tell that what you're doing is important. I can tell it takes a lot of preparation, and I appreciate your time. I am going to pretty much read what I wrote, because I came today as a learner, and I have to tell you I have different and more concerns after listening to what's been presented today. I really appreciate all of my neighbors taking the time to present, and I agree with what they have said. But after listening to the planning manager and the developer, I have different concerns. I didn't hear any evidence presented about the need for more housing in this area, or any housing needs that were that have been created since the original planning. I tried to listen closely. I may have missed that, but I didn't hear any evidence of new housing needs that would warrant a large apartment complex. I'm also not familiar with the terminology of your planning commission, but I can tell you that my friend and I took a nice walk in this area last night, and I don't know what platted means, but I can tell you there are houses being built, there are foundations, there are realtor signs, there are a lot of people who don't even know this is happening, and they live in this area. We walked here. So there's a lot happening, hammers swinging all day long until late. I would also like to call attention to 105th Street, and it is fairly straight through here. But I don't know if you can tell, these are neighborhood streets. These are not thoroughfares. These are not areas where a lot of cars go down. It's hard to meet 2 cars on our street. So they're very much neighborhood streets. And I would like to say the only reason someone might take O Street to get to the elementary school would be because they're going to encounter an incredible nightmare of a bottleneck to try to get to the elementary street on 105th or 104th, because they'll be going through neighborhood streets. And the last concern I have is it's a very nice walk. I think you saw in my letter that I just moved from Bulgaria. We're pedestrians in Bulgaria. We walk everywhere. It's a nice walk to the elementary school, and I would anticipate in nice weather there will be a lot of children and families walking in this area where there are also a lot of cars trying to get to the same location 2 times a day. So those are my concerns, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Other testimony in opposition? If there's no others in the room, I believe we may have someone on Zoom who wanted to testify. Thanks, Steve.
Go ahead, Lee.
Lee, are you there? Do you want to get rid of the map?
Oh, can you take the map?
Mr. Searcy, are you there? Hello, sir. If you can hear me, you can go forward with your testimony.
I believe I see he's on mute.
Yeah.
There
Alright,
he
I was
goes.
just gonna say- Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I apologize.
Please state your name and your address for the record, please.
Sure. My name is Lee Searcy, and I am at 10501 Shorefront Drive. We are about, a block and a half or so north of the proposed apartment development. And yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us all. And I agree with all of my neighbors that spoke ahead of me with all of their concerns. We are right at the corner there, and like the previous lady mentioned, there is that 105th Street is definitely not meant for the kind of traffic that would happen because of these proposed apartments. We moved to that house on April 19th of 2021. Had we have known that this was coming, I don't know that we would have purchased that home. And the people that are, like the previous lady mentioned, the people that are going to be purchasing those homes that are being built probably don't know what's coming as well. So I would strongly urge the council members to object to the change. The previous, I think Steve had mentioned that there are apartment buildings west of us and north of us. I think those apartments are more than enough to accommodate the people that are looking for apartments. I don't think this third complex that they're proposing is needed, in my opinion, besides deviating from what they originally planned is concerning. So, yeah, please, I encourage you to reject this proposal of the change. And I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, thank you for testifying today. Is there any other testimony in opposition at this time? Okay, staff questions. Did I miss somebody? I'm sorry. Oh,
Since the last speaker spoke on traffic, several other people have as well. There is one issue to be aware of on 105, 105th Street. Right here is a traffic circle, tiny traffic circle. I don't know who got the bright idea of putting it in, and the whole neighborhood says this was a dumb idea. But what happens when the weeds grow in that little traffic circle, and as everyone is pointing out, it is a critical intersection in our neighborhood. You've got cars used to going around the left side, going around the right side, because nobody's there some of the time. But one incident did happen where the grass grew up and kids were standing behind it when a car tried to go around it the right way. And it's dangerous. And so if you put a lot of traffic in there, I don't know how big trucks won't be able to manipulate that at all. They're just going to have to run right over it. But it is something that doesn't affect the planning commission necessarily, but somebody with the city, I think, should look at that traffic circle for all kinds of other reasons. It's not needed, and it's a pain in the rear, and it is dangerous for kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, staff questions. Any questions for staff?
Sure, I've got one.
Yep. Come on up, Steve.
Whose responsibility is it to maintain the middle of the median, or middle of the traffic circle?
Sometimes in the association and the approvals, it notes that medians even, or circles, even though they are in the public right-of-way, they are the responsibility of the association.
So if they're having problems with that being capped up, they need to contact their homeowners association?
In this particular case, since it is a brand-new circle, I think they would best be to start talk with Lincoln Transportation and Utilities, call Bob Simmering if somebody has a concern about the size of the circle. Because I think it is correct that this is not a typical size circle as some of the other areas. And so I think I would start with LTU before they talk to the association.
Thank you.
Steve, the given that this is obviously a very new development, and parts of it aren't platted yet, and I'm curious about the ownership. Is that one developer for the entire development?
For the Dominion at Stevens Creek, there is one developer. Mike can address what is done, but typically then they're sold to different builders. Mm-hmm. And then with the different builders have different realtors. And so you may end up with dozens of realtors and dozens of builders that you're coordinating with.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions for Steve at this time? Okay, thank you.
If I could just add one piece of information. I did look at our letter that we sent out on this one. And as we do in all of our letters, it says, here's your opportunity to speak and here's your opportunity to appear. It gives directions on how you can attend via video conferencing, via Zoom, and how you sign up for that. It also talks about how you would email any comments, and it ends with, then you are encouraged to submit to us your comments. And so I think with all of our things, I'm sorry if people misread it, but we try in various paragraphs within it to get the information out as where you can find the information and encourage people to comment.
On that, because I'm new.
Sure.
So how far out did that letter go? How?
In this particular circumstance, Mike is correct. It's usually sent to people within 250 feet. What happened in this circumstance is it went out to the larger CUP. So I think it went out to hundreds of people. And that's partly what then generated an awful lot of calls immediately to us. I will say I'm appreciative to some of the early neighbors who called and who offered to get a correct map on the neighborhood Facebook page, because I think that helped for some people to understand, hold it, this couldn't be anywhere within the development, it was for a specific location, because our letter was very, had a map that was very general and did not provide as much information as this.
Thank you.
I would also note when I had colored in the yellow, it wasn't meant to say these are the only lots that are built, or it was just to generally kind of give you an idea of 104th, 105th, and the last person was on Shorefront, which was also in that area as well.
Could I ask just one more time? So the letter, I believe the letter that went out, what was the date? Is that the question that you also had? What was the date that
So our notification, as the neighbors are correct, it is typically goes out about somewhere between 8 to 9 days before the Planning Commission hearing.
Okay. And so the permit itself, however, was submitted to the planning commission, to
Planning
your
department.
office's planning department on the 29th of September.
I can verify that. I can also let you know, just in a general sense, that, yes, that date is probably correct, that often things are submitted, and sometimes we do an initial review and find out it needs X, Y, and Z. And so, yes, sometimes things are submitted, and there's multiple months before it comes to you for a public hearing.
Mhm. Any other questions for Steve at this time?
Can you explain, and I wish Bob was here, because this is more Bob's purview, but perhaps you can explain how, just because this is more dense, more population, that doesn't necessarily equate into, you know, like if this is 6 times the density, it doesn't necessarily equate into 6 times the traffic.
Correct, because a single-family detached house, there's been hundreds and hundreds of studies done on various land use types, and particularly single-family and multifamily. So single-family detached typically is around 9.5 to 10 trips a day, coming and going. Apartments are typically in the range of 6.5 trips today per unit, and that's on a typical basis. And so, in this case, going from 77 to 462, probably even you do the 462 times 6.5, it's still probably ultimately more trips. But the neighborhoods themselves, all of the 27-foot wide streets, are meant to handle more than 7 dwelling units an acre. And so we don't size them for different neighborhoods and say, well, this is single family detached, so it'll be a 23-foot wide street, and this is a 30-foot wide. They're all 27-foot wide because they can handle much more traffic than this. 105th Street was designed in mind that people were going to use that street to head north to the elementary school. And I do think people in the apartment complex, if you're going to the elementary school, you will probably go within the neighborhood. You would not go down to O Street and go around. So I do think they will do that, and that's part of the reason 105th Street was not 1 mile long and a straight street. It has several bends in it so that you would have to make at least 4 turns to reach the elementary school site, because each time you have to turn, then that slows down your trip, and each time you're bending, that helps slows it down. And cars that are parked on the street also help slow it down. I'll just add, in a general sense, one of the things that we are cognizant of is that as more houses are built with 3- and 4-car garages, we are seeing fewer cars parked on the street during the day. And so, regardless of the neighborhood, even if this neighborhood was 100% single-family detached, when there's no cars parked along the street, studies have shown people will actually increase their speed because you're not worried about hitting some kind of a parked car, and you have a much clearer view as you're driving along. So unfortunately, even the residents of the single-family neighborhoods that I have lived in, people will drive fast when there's not cars parked along the street.
One last question. I assume there are lots of paved sidewalks for children to walk to school? I
Yes,
mean, that's kind of
in
retro,
all of our
but-
neighborhoods, sidewalks are required on both sides of the street, and in addition to this neighborhood, as I pointed out, there will be a public trail that will skirt along the east side of the lake and head up toward the elementary school. So if you didn't want to walk along the streets, you could cut over to the trail. It'll just kind of depends on how far that is out of the way. Some kids won't go out of the way to go to that. But yes, that's chief and paramount of the design of the streets. You're trying to keep the speeds within the neighborhood by people who live within the neighborhood low, because you generally want to try to keep the traffic below 25 miles an hour, because then the unfortunate event that a person is hit by a car, the slower they're going, the less impact there is to the person that is hit. And that is definitely found throughout the U.S., and that is something that is very important to LTU and to planning, is that we try to keep speeds lower within neighborhoods. A lot of traffic circles do have that benefit of that. In this case, I think the one that was built, in my opinion, is too small to be of that kind of a benefit, and there's already been complaints about that particular circle. And so I think that may be something we need to look at. But that is part of the idea of circles and other aspects of the neighborhood, is to try to keep the traffic slower within the neighborhood.
Dick?
Steve, again, educate me. On the special permit, they still would have to apply for a final plat on this, would they not?
Correct. So this is the overall plan where the streets and the lots and the apartments will be. There would still be a step of a final plat to plat the single-family detached lots or the apartment lot, but that is all done now administratively. So if you come in and your plan matches this approved plan, we approve the final plat and there's no further notice or anything else.
Where would a decision be made at what stage as far as a left turn lane and right turn lanes with 105th?
That is already part of the approval, the very first approval with this, set up the design of 105th Street.
So will there be left turn lanes and right turn lanes?
I'll have Mike address that in terms of how that actually got constructed, because he'd have the details better than I would.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else for Steve? Thank you. Applicant rebuttal.
So I'll act like I'm in Congress here and want to start at one point of unanimity that we have with the neighborhood, and that is that the existing traffic calming device up on 105th Street is horrible. And I don't like to point my fingers very often at our city staff, but we in doing newer subdivisions always try to look at the routing of streets, and if they're long stretches, how can we calm traffic? And they haven't been real fans of speed humps or anything, and so we said, okay, well, what do you want? And so they presented us with this template on how to do that one. And we really scratched our heads, and I think we asked them 5 times, are you sure, are you sure, are you sure? And then we constructed it, and we told them it was going to be problematic. And so I think some calls from the neighborhood to Bob Simmering and LTU would be helpful in potentially getting that removed. That is it's a calming device. It's not a true roundabout now. So in that matter, to be clear, that same type of thing was planned at this intersection initially. And given what we learned on the other one, that this is a true, what we would call a true roundabout. It's not going to be as big as your roundabouts in your arterial streets, but it is a true roundabout, where the other one, somebody with a trailer is supposed to assume they should go left through that one. So we second their emotions on that. So otherwise, I just want to kind of go through a few points one by one and maybe try not to take up too much of your time. Ms. Cruz, you asked about the notification timeline. So I would say that probably less than 30% of our applications that we make to the planning department go immediately in that 4-week submittal timeline to the next meeting. So we submitted this in September, and then we personally halted it as we tried to figure out some site plan issues, what kind of building, underground parking, a lot of things like that. And so that was the delay. And I think the important fact pattern here with timing is so, and even though somebody could come in and ask planning what's been submitted, and they'll tell them it's public information. But as Steve said, the clock really starts ticking when we say, okay, we're going to schedule this. And so, and then it had some other staff delays with questions, delays by us, then by staff. I think the important timeline is when that 4-week period back from today started of, okay, this project is officially a go, we're going for the public hearings. And it was exactly that same week that we sent our notices out to the 7 lots, and maybe to follow up a little bit, Mr. Campbell. And so in the age of COVID, we have generally been doing this. We had a similar project at Prairie Village North, and we use that letter as kind of a litmus test to say, okay, people feel like this is a big deal or is it not? And we got absolutely no response from those letters. And we were told again, as Steve mentioned, that was a notification area. This notification went out wider. Neither here nor there, but I want to clarify there was no deception. We followed all the rules. The project was delayed. We sent out our letter to people in the 250 area, which is what we always use. And we always ask planning to reinforce that, that we're correct. And they do. So, again, there was no deception in the process. It was simply somewhat of a normal process that we go through in these applications. So let's talk about traffic. I know that that's been a big thing. And I think it is unfortunate there aren't LTU representatives here, but because of the location of this close to O Street, I think we can all agree that the predominant trips are going to be down to O Street and back up into the subdivision. And yes, going out on 105th, don't hold me to it, Mr. Campbell, but I believe there is if there's ever a through movement across and the left movement to go east is one lane. I think that was decided upon because we're getting right towards the Stevens Creek floodway, and so there won't be a lot of urban development in the next 40 years, 50 years to the east, but it will have a right out turn lane. And then there's full turn lanes built in the street to NDOT standards.
No street?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
$600,000 worth. So, so back to the traffic. And then as Steve mentioned, typically what we see in the apartments anymore with the large influx of student housing down by the university is most of our developers are not even doing 3-bedroom units. If they do, they may do, say there's 60 units in a building, they might have 3 or 4 3-bedroom units, primarily studio and 1-bedroom apartments. That's what's planned here is the predominance of that. Some of those people will have kids, some won't. And so it's probably not dissimilar than lots of other elementary sites in town in that on the perimeter, on the arterial streets in these districts, there are multifamily projects, and those people will drive through a residential neighborhood to get to the elementary school, and they drive with care, and it is just the way it exists in our community. And it's the same thing everywhere. A 27-foot wide residential street that has enough capacity to serve that traffic. And so with that, Public Works has had absolutely zero questions about the traffic impact in reviewing this application. Parking, these buildings, 2 things. One will be market rate apartments. 2, at this point, they're planned to have underground parking as well as surface parking as well as garage stalls. Every project we do for seasoned multifamily developers, they know the first thing they're going to do is kill themselves if they don't have enough parking. And so, and the city of Lincoln has what I think is probably an aggressive requirement of, well, in this case, because it's R5, it's 1.2 or 1.75 stalls per unit. But typically we see them telling us to do 2.1 to 2.2 stalls per unit. So they have the capacity that they need. We've talked about the stormwater issue. In fact, I want to hold up a different exhibit here, and this I think helps give reference to the state of affairs out there. This is an aerial photo that isn't that old. It's probably March of last year. But it shows, I think, a little bit better view of kind of what's going on. So on the storm water issue, property really peaks right in here. This hill will be removed. And to give you a sense of elevations, this is 1320, 1340, 1340, excuse me, 1230, 1240, 1250, 1250, and then it goes 1240, 1230, 1220, 1210. Here's our existing detention cell. The other proposed cell would be right here. Those may be merged. We've talked with planning about a street network that might change, but all of the runoff goes that way. And as Tim Zock said, if you read the staff report, it clearly says before you come forward with the final plat, you're going to satisfy all the requirements. And so, and in fact, there might be some potential changes by the time we final plat this that require us to contain even more runoff, but whatever it is, at that time, we have to meet them. And so there's none going towards the Waterford neighborhood. There's none going to the north. and everything will be captured in an additional detention cell. And I know one of the gentlemen talked about restrictive covenants, and that's not an issue usually that this body cares or is concerned about, but restrictive covenants are generally placed on each phase of a subdivision as it's built, not for the overall subdivision. In fact, in my 25 years, I've never seen a restrictive covenant put on vacant land in a subdivision that says what restrictions are going to be there that entitle those folks within that subdivision. And so I wanted to be clear that when they say there were restrictive covenants, there were restrictive covenants within their phase of the subdivision because they're usually filed at the time of the final plat. I know one lady made a comment about O Street traffic, and that's not unlike other intersections in town during the peak hour. That is an issue that the city has to resolve. As we all know, there's places all over town that have constraints. That's why we have a 1/4 cent sales tax to help try to address those needs, as well as our wheel tax. And so getting back to this picture real fast, I just wanted to show this to give you an idea again. So this is where the new true roundabout would be in 105th Street. These will be the single-family homes. This is the street that will have townhomes on either side of it. And I think that helps give a little more reference to the distance that this multifamily complex is from the existing homes. And I also just wanted to show a few other examples. This one's right down the street, another project that we did. And we've got multifamily units that are 189 feet and 173 feet from single-family homes. And we witnessed that there was no difference in uptake on these lots, and this development sold out very quickly with the adjacent multifamily. Some of you might remember this project, depending on your tenure at the Planning Commission. This was one that was an unplanned multifamily project down off of Highway 2, next to the older Pine Lake neighborhood and then the Edenton South neighborhoods, in which I live just off this screen. And there were main concerns from the Pine Lake development, and they were within, in fact, one of the properties was within 66 feet of this development by Broadmoor. This dimension here gives you a better idea of what I was talking about in the distance between where we would plan to do a building and the adjacent townhomes right there, the 364 feet. And so here's another one that we did in Tamarind Ridge area down by Sid Dillon, where you've got the multifamily buildings, again, located as close as 90 feet to a single-family lot, and everything has, and again, this is a 27-foot wide street. There's a school here, in terms of the typical traffic loads that we see. And so I think that the important thing here too is that it's not a change of zone. This is unused density in this community unit plan that was approved. And I do think it's very important to continue to understand that we do have a need for mixes of housing in this community. And that is what has happened in this case, that the demand for single family is just extremely high right now. Occupancy rates are nearly 100% in this town. It's just very crazy. And the more of that housing type that we can provide actually helps on the supply to match that demand so that those rental rates do not continue to climb and climb and climb. And so I think that's the other thing to consider. I understand that these folks did their research, and but until things are final platted, as Steve said, they are always subject to change. And this change, in our eyes and in the planning department's eyes, if I could speak for them, is reasonable. They've never had any reprehensions about this. LTU's had never one question about any traffic-related issues. And so we feel like this is a good fit. The traffic is going to use O Street predominantly. I have found in my neighborhood, with the two different multifamily complexes that went in, it has proved to be a non-event in terms of interior traffic that we see, and waiting that project connecting to O Street for Broadmoor I feared for my life how long I thought I'd be waiting to cross Highway 2. Generally, I am lucky to see one car there. It's at full occupancy. And I think this goes hand in hand with what we see a lot in our community, is change is difficult, change is hard, but it isn't always bad. And that our reaction that we see to multifamily is generally what you're experiencing here is, oh my gosh, this is going to be so many units and so many houses and so many cars. But they live like the rest of us. They make trips in and out of the subdivision, and they go to their unit and stay there. And this will have a clubhouse for them and recreational facilities, but they'll be like any other citizen, using our public trails and driving on our public roads. So with that, if you have any other final questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If not, we ask for your approval with the strong staff recommendation on this.
Questions for Mike? Thank you.
I would move that we close the public hearing.
Second, Core?
Jerry?
Okay, Ball?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Cruz?
Yes.
Edens?
Yes.
Rodenberg?
Yes.
Edgerton?
Yes.
7-0.
I would move that we approve special permit 17022A.
Is there a second?
Second, Core?
Discussion.
Yeah, I can understand some of the neighbors feeling they didn't get the information and didn't get the correct information in a timely manner. And that frustrates me a little bit. But this apartment part would be very close to O Street. And actually, I see it as a good buffer to the residential areas behind. Plus, with residential lots completely surrounding the apartments, the developer wouldn't propose that if he didn't think they could be sold. They are creating better street accesses. But I do agree that apartment traffic is basically going to go 105th to O Street. And there's going to be very little movement. I would not anticipate that there would be a lot of children in the apartment part of it. And if there are, there's not going to be a huge number of them going to the elementary school then. So I don't see that as a real problem, which most of our elementary and middle schools in this city are built right in the middle of the subdivisions and aren't separated and sitting out on the busy streets and stuff. So I don't see this as anything different than has been happening in every other neighborhood around the city.
Other conversation, discussion?
I can relate to the neighbors, and when I first came on the commission, which seems like forever ago now, I was very frustrated by all the changes that would happen. And part of that just because of my line of work and how I think. But this is a very normal change for us to see as a body. Sometimes it has to do with changing market conditions. Sometimes it has to do with a lot of other things too. But this is when we try to plan development from a land use perspective, we want usually the higher density to be towards the major street. And that's kind of what's going on here. And then step it down as we go into the neighborhood. And that's also, as of right now, part of the plan to have the townhomes around them and then gradually get into the single family. The streets are planned to handle this level of traffic. I honestly, I think this is a good project. A successful neighborhood needs to have all types of housing units, apartments, townhomes, single family, all of that. And I don't have any major qualms about putting this apartment complex where it's located right now.
Yeah.
Certainly it was not my intention to impugn the motives of the development company. Like Gloria, I'm new to this gig. It's only, wow, I'm a pro at 2 weeks, 2 meetings rather. So it's helpful to me to understand the timing and scheduling of how things flow. I will agree with what both of my colleagues have said thus far. I think it's also a case of natural evolution for the city of Lincoln. We have to grow. Growth is not just about expanding outward. It is also about making use of the existing infrastructure and space that's already there. Having said that, I do think that it is important for the individuals who feel they're going to be impacted to have an opportunity to speak their piece and help us to understand how they'll be affected. So I just want to say that I very much appreciate all the perspectives that were presented here today.
Yeah, I do want to go on the record and say, I do believe that based on what was presented, that it was put together in the correct way in the project. Equally, it is aligned to our comprehensive plan, right, in terms of density. But the biggest disappointment was the communication. I think from the developer perspective, it's about 5 times the amount that was originally planned, right, which is significant, especially going into, purchasing a home in the subdivision and the impact to the community. And what's even more concerning for me is, once this decision is made, the platting and the site plan is administrative activity. And so there can equally be more changes, right, that will just move. And if the communication didn't happen now, why would it happen before? So I do think it's very important for the developer to take that into consideration before moving forward with the project.
I'm kind of 50-50-ish on this. As a realtor, it is my responsibility. I'm bound to protect homeowners and homeowners' rights. I was relieved by some of the cities and the applicants' explanation that there will be homeowner buffers around. And so nobody is going to be surprised and backed up. I was also happy to hear that it was not the same owner-developer in both of these, Dominion and Waterford. So it really wasn't a bait and switch. And I'm also concerned about the timing. Whichever way this goes, and I'm correct that they can appeal, whether it's rejected here, the applicant can take it to the city council. Whether it's rejected here or accepted here, you folks will have some time. You have, I think, 14 days to take it to the city council, and then you'll be put on the agenda, so there will be more time, and you can make your case, and you will be heard.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank you guys all for testifying. I've been on the other side of that with the nerves and everything, and it takes a lot to stand up there and say your piece. And I have to mention that school is really dear to me. That's Ada Robinson Elementary. We got our name. But I do like the fact it's on O Street. I think schools are going to have a lot of traffic with them. That's how they're designed. That school's going to hopefully be at capacity. So that traffic's going to come from someplace, whether it's the apartment complex or neighboring neighborhoods, same amount of kids in the same amount of school. But thank you so much for saying your piece.
And I will be voting to approve this special permit. I just want to, I appreciate everyone's comments, appreciate the testimony that was brought in front of us today. I did want to clarify, as pointed out by the applicant, this is not a change of zone, that this was a change with regard to the number of units that was allowed within the CUP, but those units had not been platted before. And so that is a change within the numbers. But again, this was not a change of zone, and so it was the zoning that was allowed as this neighborhood was determined. It was about increasing the unused density that was already allowed by the R3 zone, and I will be voting to approve. Jerry?
Okay, this is for the conditional approval of special permit 17022A. Again, this is final action on this item unless appealed to the city council within 14 days. Ball?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Cruz?
Yes.
Edens?
Yes.
Rodenberg?
No.
Edgerton?
Yes.
Motion carried, 6-1.
And with that, we will be taking a short break before we come to our final action of the day.
Have a good time.
Right. Okay, Steve had a few things to share with us with regard to the next item on our agenda.
Yeah, I think Jerry can go ahead and read it, and
Okay.
and then before you make a motion, we'll just provide information to update you from where you are from last time.
Excellent, thank you. Jerry?
Okay. Under administrative action only is item 5.1, special permit 21042, to allow for the construction of a large solar energy conversion system in compliance with section 13.051 of the Lancaster County zoning regulations on property generally located from west of 148th to 190th Streets and from Holdridge Street to north of Havelock Avenue. A map of this area is under consideration and is available for review in the Planning Department office located at 555 South 10th Street. Staff recommendation is for conditional approval. Again, this is final action on this item unless appealed to the county board within 14 days. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on this item?
No.
Are there any ex parte communications that took place or additional information you learned while visiting this site?
No. Steve?
Steve Hendrickson with the Planning Department, 555 South 10th Street. Just 2 points. So this item was before you at your previous meeting, which was October 27th. It failed to gain a necessary 5 votes one way or the other. So it is back before you to vote again. That vote is now cleared away. So you're back to square one. So someone will need to make a motion, and then after that motion is seconded, you can then have amendments if you wish to that. Just to provide you information, since what has happened since the last meeting, yesterday, November 16th, the county board voted 4-1 to deny the text amendment that was proposed that would have changed the regulations in the county. So the county regulations, as they were 3 weeks ago, are unchanged, and that text amendment was defeated. Previously, at the last meeting on October 27th, you approved the portion of this large project that is in 2 jurisdictions, the city jurisdiction and the county jurisdiction. At the last meeting, you approved special permit 19036A by a 7-0 vote. That is the portion that was in the city jurisdiction and subject to the city regulations, and that was not appealed. So that was final action planning commission, and so that is indeed no further action will be held on the portion of this project that is in the city jurisdiction. And that city jurisdiction has different regulations. It does have, for that particular special permit, it was the one that had the 100-foot setback for non-participating properties with a dwelling and a 50-foot setback for non-participating properties without a dwelling. So then back to what you have right now. This is County Special Permit 21042. It does have the 100-foot setback to dwellings, non-participating dwellings, non-participating properties with a dwelling, 50-foot setback for those without. But in the county board adopted previously a 300-foot setback for non-participating dwellings that are in a CUP. That is different than the city. So on the county side, you have that 50 and 100-foot setback, but if you're in a CUP, it is actually a 300-foot setback because the rules regarding CUPs, if you recall, were different. And there had been a text amendment as a part of that. And then just lastly, for your information, because of last time there had been several amendments, which are now off the table because they had not passed as a part of the overall motion, we prepared for you 3 additional conditions for your consideration. If any of those are of interest, they will need to be part of your original motion or a motion to amend afterwards. But they were prepared to address things like concern about the solar panel inverters. Those are the little, utility boxes, so to speak, in the long rows. And also a condition potentially for a road maintenance agreement with the county engineer. And also, since there were a lot of questions about making sure there's information provided to the rural fire districts, there's a condition about the developer being required to provide information to those rural fire districts, and also at the developer's cost to provide equipment necessary for those rural fire districts to gain entry. And we went ahead and specifically listed those 3 rural fire districts because this falls within the jurisdictions of 3 different ones. And we listed all 3 regardless if they're in the city or the county jurisdiction.
Are there any questions for, or clarification needed from Steve?
So we changed the wording from strive to put the inversion boxes to very specifically setback.
Yeah, so as we had drafted for your consideration, and again, you are quite free to phrase this differently, because there are multiple of these small inverter boxes, we thought it was much more appropriate to have a setback. And so as it is drafted, there would be a 300-foot setback to a non-participating property line period, to those inverter boxes. That's not necessarily guaranteeing what the decibel level may or may not be, but because there are so many of them and there are so many factors that can be involved with a lot of smaller facilities, it is much clearer from a regulation standpoint to have a setback versus trying to have a decibel reading for multiple smaller things. There is already in the regulations today, a decibel reading for private electrical substations that might be a part of the project. And that's a little bit easier to control and to measure because it is one thing at one location. So if there are complaints, it's much easier for health to try to determine, yes, it's coming from that facility, it's large. These inverters, it would be more of a challenge to try to one by one determine some type of particular decibel level. There was also, I think, in our view, in looking at this, we had just seen less concern about the inverter noise levels. But so as drafted, it is a distance versus a sound measurement.
Yes.
Steve, would you go back and you said the county board voted 4-1 to deny what was it a change?
It was the text amendment that was previously before you that was proposed by a private party. And it was the private party was actually proposing several regulations that, in our view, taken as a whole, would have made it more difficult. It included things like a requirement for an environmental impact statement.
Right.
It required things such as a 500-foot setback.
Yeah.
So after a lot of discussion, the county board, their final vote on it, after a few amendments failed, was to deny the text amendment as a whole, 4-1.
Okay. And what are as it stands now with the county board, what kind of screening is required?
Good question. May have Tom come up and help me with that because I don't have them immediately here in front of me.
Tom Chaka, planning staff. The screening hasn't changed from what's in the zoning code currently. It's still 4 trees per 100 linear feet. It's actually quite extensive on all the screening, but it's a screening to dwellings if they're within 300 feet of the panels. The screening is required. If they're further away, there is no screening required. They could use a mixture of plants and fencing, but if they use trees, it's 4 per 100 feet with a mixture of evergreen and deciduous.
Additional questions for staff? Okay, thank you. With that, I will take a motion.
I would move that we deny special permit 21042.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion.
My reasoning behind this is I'm still very concerned for the CUPs that already exist in the county. They bought their properties under a set of rules that existed, and now those rules are being changed on them after they've done this investment. And so I'm just hung up with that, and I have to believe that, I think the solar project is an excellent project, but I have to believe they can find some raw farmland instead of going into the outlots of these existing CUPs. New CUPs, absolutely no problem, because then they're buying knowing what's going to be behind them. But I don't think there should be solar panels in the outlots of the CUPs that exist now anywhere near the homes.
I just have a question for Commissioner Campbell. Is that including the staff's condition recommendation?
Yes, I think I do. I would agree with all the staff's recommendations, but I think by just turning this down and sending it to the county board, they're in a position to add those also. But I do think the 3 staff conditions are very appropriate if it is passed.
Other discussion?
Yeah, I am all for alternative energy plans. When I coached at the Bob Devaney Center, there was a coal train that came by every 20 minutes, mile long. And now we have a coal train coming by every day going to Nebraska City. That's all being burned up into our atmosphere, which, you look at the news today, there's major flooding in the Northeast, and we need solar. We really need solar. But I voted no in our last session because, as I reiterate, as a realtor, I'm duty-bound to protect homeowners' rights. And to me, I think they were violated in this case.
Additional discussion? I brought up this issue in the very first hearing we had on this when we were looking at the change in the regulations. That was a big concern of mine was the retroactive nature of what was coming in front of us. However, that has gone to the county board, and they have overruled that decision. And as a result, this application is in front of us. The law is, or the regulations are set with regard to what the county board has determined is appropriate. And I feel that I am required to move forward from that point, even though I frankly, personally agree with what you've stated is the issue, Commissioner Campbell. So I will be voting against your motion.
As I understand it, the county board can change their mind on that.
That is correct. I would assume they can as well.
And I've gotten some indication that there's more leaning to do that. And so that's why I bring forth denial and let them determine the correct action. Because yes, I agree with you. I was very hung up on the CUPs that exist, and when the county first turned it down, then I still wasn't happy with what I feel is doing damage to those people.
Mm-hmm.
Point of clarification. If the motion to deny is voted down, and then we have a motion to approve, and we don't have the 5 votes, how many times do we come back and...
I believe at that point we will ask for some direction from staff, but because we do not have a full body here, we could bring this back again for an additional vote.
But we also can make an motion to amend, right, with staff conditions as well.
That is correct.
Right, and either deny or approve that, I believe, as well.
And I did talked to planning and asked them to clarify a few things like the word strive, to put the inversion box. They clarified that. I'm glad they made some of those changes, but I'm still going to vote for Dick's, not amendment, but motion to deny.
Great. I think with that, we are ready to vote on the motion in front of us.
Yeah, this is for the denial of special permit 21042. Ball.
Yes.
Campbell.
Yes.
Cruz.
Yes.
Edens.
No.
Rodenberg.
Yes.
Ryman Yost.
No.
Edgerton.
No.
Okay, motion failed 4-3. Failed due to the lack of receiving 5 affirmative votes.
Okay. With that, is there another motion to be made here?
For the purposes of discussion, I will move that we approve this agenda item with the addition of all 3 amendments as outlined by staff.
With the new conditions proposed by staff. So that's a motion to approve special permit 21042 as amended.
Yeah, with the additions of those, conditions, yeah.
Is there a second?
I'll second Edens.
Okay, discussion.
I did just want to note Jennifer Holloway with the County Attorney's Office, 575 South 10th Street. Just because of what happened last time and because of the question that you did ask, Rick, it will be stuck with you guys as long as you don't get to a 5 whatever votes. I'm not trying to sway you, but the reality is whether you guys approve it or deny it, it's getting appealed. So my suggestion was instead of having it stuck with you guys time and time again, I understand you might not want to vote one way or another. It seems like you all want this to go forward to the county board. So I would suggest thinking that through when you make your final vote so we can get to that 5 and keep this moving forward.
Okay.
And I will just say by way of starting the discussion that I share the concerns. I also share, the idea that moving forward with new forms of energy is important and that solar is a great way to do that. Just knowing the history, I think it's important that at this point, at least these conditions I think are helpful. It doesn't reduce kind of my shared Tracy and Dick, what has happened with the people who are already living there, but we've tried that once. And it will be up to the county board to make a change.
Any other conversation?
Yeah, the conditions that we've added as amendments, I think, are excellent. I would also like to see us strengthen the screening a little bit and go to 6 evergreen trees per 100 foot rather than 4. A pine, a full-grown pine will get about 20 feet across, 25 in some species, but it takes it a long time to do that. And by going to 6, it's getting the screen to develop much faster. So I would offer that as an amendment also.
Second, Rodenberg.
Additional discussion? So just want to clarify, we would need to vote to add that to the amendments and then vote on the amended motion. Is that correct? All right. So with the motion and the second on Dick's suggestion on the additional adding 6 trees to the current screening requirements, I think that's what's in front of us to add that amendment.
Can I clarify, are we talking 6 total, or are we talking 10 total?
No, 6 total per 100 square feet.
That's added on to the addition?
To
And-
change it from 4 to 6.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
The earlier language was evergreen or deciduous.
Yes, so.
Yeah, excuse me, we will just take it that in, where it currently requires 6, it would, or 4, it would now require 6.
And it eliminates the deciduous.
Oh, and you want to eliminate? the
Yeah, I want it to be evergreen
Okay,
because
thank you.
I want a year-round screen in that place.
And that was what your motion was, to the 6 evergreen trees?
Yes.
Okay.
The way it's written right now, it says, of the 4 trees, every 100 linear feet, at least 1 shall be deciduous shade tree and 3 shall be evergreen or ornamental trees. The trees shall be evenly distributed within 100 linear feet. You just want it all evergreen trees. Okay.
The man knows his trees.
Okay. So we are now voting to add that to the proposed amendments. Jerry?
Okay, this is on Commissioner Campbell's motion, and this was seconded by Rodenberg. Ball?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Cruz?
Yes.
Edens?
Yes.
Rodenberg?
Yes.
Ryman Yost?
Yes.
Edgerton?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0.
Do we have to vote on the adopting the 3 conditions that the staff has proposed, or is that
I put
part
it
of
in
the
as a part of
original
the
motion?
motion.
It was a part of the original motion to
Okay.
include those as, and this was now added to that. So we are now voting on the approval of special permit 21042 as amended with the staff recommendations as well as Commissioner Campbell's recommendation.
That's correct.
Jerry?
Okay. Ball?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Cruz?
Yes.
Edens?
Yes.
Rodenberg?
No.
Ryman Yost?
Yes.
Edgerton?
Yes.
Motion carried, 6-1.
Okay. At this time, anyone wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda may do so. As such, we will take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
Second. Ball.
Ball, okay.
Jerry?
Okay, Ball?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Cruz?
Yes.
Edens?
Yes.
Rodenberg?
Yes.
Ryman Yost?
Yes.
Edgerton?
Yes, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Carried 7-0.